Hello! Welcome back to this Phantasy Star Force series, and I'd like to tie up a couple of loose ends before I leave Ido. I promise I'll move on to more interesting things right after. Uh-oh. Well, that couple back in Narya or Nalia has good news and bad news. The good news is the woman will probably be able to move back in with her parents. Bad news is maybe not the guy. Well, those kids might be picking up hunter habits. I think they'll be fine. Oh ho ho! Relationships, am I right? That fortune teller was right on the money. So what I find most surprising about this, or at least the most interesting, is not that Alice can cook, but that she'll cook for her neighbors. That's not a thing that I would have figured out at first glance. Adds a nice little bit of depth. I believe there are some hints that she enjoys poetry too. Well, we got a nice little transition cave. There isn't too much of note here, but there is a new mechanic that I'd like to point out right here. The game manual actually warns you that some monsters will have combination attacks. There is something it does not warn you about though, and we're about to see it. Instead of using a combination attacks, some monsters can just combine with each other. And the result is much tougher than its individual parts. In this case, it's pretty tricky because, like the smaller version, it resists physical attacks, but its health pool is quite good. However, Vol will insta-kill it, yeah, pretty much every time. In the multiple times that I've been through this cave, I've seen Vol fail on those things a total of once. And in addition to the monster being tougher than its separate parts, it also gives a lot more experience than its separate parts when beaten. So it's actually to your benefit to let those things combine, provided that you can handle them. I make it a point to not just wander around to grind for experience, but if there's something within the encounter that I can do to increase or make powering up a little easier, I might as well do it. I mean, Han has plenty of uses of Vol. And these guys, these are the first appearance we're gonna see of that army that was mentioned before. Zio has actual human-looking soldiers with him, and they must be pretty well trained because we've been through a few things and they still hit us pretty hard. If you want to get through this cave quick, just keep going around and to the left every time. That'll take you right to the exit. Eliminate. Well, Rika has an instant death skill as well. The timing is a little unfortunate though, because she hasn't had time to fully develop her stats, especially her dexterity, and the enemy's defense stat for it is agility. For the next portion of the game, most of the enemies are going to be pretty fast, so Eliminate is not going to be all that reliable. We'll have plenty of chances to make it work in the future though, don't you worry about that. And speaking of instant death, we've got tech users. And remember how I mentioned Grizz's instant death skill is resisted by physical strength? Well, these tech users don't have a lot of that, so Crash is pretty darn reliable. We've got a town right next to that ominous castle. Well, let's go right on in. It's a cult town. Well, there's a bit more to it than that. Unlike the castle, this town did not just appear out of nowhere. I'd like to draw attention to something. It would be very easy to just write this like the entire town is just full of Zio's followers and that's it. No one would really question it. But what we get instead is a little bit of story about how this town was kind of taken over after the castle appeared. That thing showed up pretty recently, the people in town were just minding their own business when that happened. And now there's not much they can do. The followers outnumber the townspeople. The soldiers in the random encounters outside let us kind of infer that the town is isolated and Zio's army is making sure no one tries anything funny. It sounds pretty annoying to me too. I think that the translation on this guy was a little bit shaky. I don't quite get who he's referring to here. Oh, these statues. Those are... I'm not sure that these count as a hint so much as an outright statement. If you're familiar with the earlier games, you know exactly what that's a picture of, and it is terrifying. Zio definitely intends to do one of those things. He seems fairly skilled at the whole promise people anything that will get them to believe in you. And the fact that things are really bad in other places of the world make that little bit of swindling a fair bit easier, I bet. And that girl back there with the green hair, well, this game loves to have townspeople in different towns that are kind of connected. We saw that in Ido, we saw it with that student who is missing from her dorms, and you see her here. Yeah, we got the full extent of religious rapture around here. I can say with a fair amount of certainty that what they're worshipping is not going to like them back. That's the case in any of these games, but it's especially obvious here. There is historical precedent. We haven't quite seen everything, though. We can pull the old Dragon Quest trick of walking around the walls, and we'll find that inn that guy was talking about. Yeah, we're gonna just say no right to that guy's face, even though he obviously is wearing the uniform. And he responds with... well, he doesn't respond with actual violence, which is, I guess, a step up. And that just told us a lot about these follower guys. In addition to that religious stuff, they're pulling the old, just pushing people around shenanigans that people get when they get a little bit of power. Right. Yeah, you're probably going out of business soon if nothing changes. Nothing he can do, either. Rough. Oh, hello. Oh, what? I thought that Chaz would not be quite so, naive about that. And that's because his history is actually kind of rough. Apparently he was, a criminal, or at least, you know, he made his living by being a warehouse thief. That's how he survived before Alice found him. So I thought he'd be a little more worldly than that. But hey, maybe he just never interacted with someone like that in his early teens. Still seems a little weird, though. Zyos Fort. This is a dungeon design that I like a lot. It seems like... oh, excuse me. We got more tech users. Now, about the monsters in general here. This is the second reason that I wanted ceramic armor. The item description said that it was anti-heat, and that is absolutely true. It's not anti-water, though. Fortunately, they cast Watt fairly rarely. There are other monsters that use fire as well. And ceramic mail makes that damage trivial. The description also says that the armor is heavy, but that part is just fluff. I checked and it does not affect agility at all. I guess it's just explaining why Han can't use it. But he's more or less okay because his magic defense is high. Now this fort, it seems like it will turn into a maze, but it's actually pretty straightforward. There's just a lot of side passages that you can quickly step into while you're exploring. This is also our first taste of dark monsters. They tend to resist instant death. In fact, there are some varieties that will just come right back with full health, but they are weak to Chaz damage. Unfortunately, Chaz's technique points are still pretty low, so I need to be a little reserved about how I use it. Though not as much as you might think. There's an interesting thing about this castle's design which I'll show off in a little bit. It's not the dead ends. Although I do appreciate that that's probably the longest dead end right there. This fort doesn't really take you along really long passages that don't go anywhere. You can very easily tell which way you're supposed to go after a little experimenting. And there's stuff. I'd like to note the wall textures, which are especially apparent in this hallway thing. It looks like the walls are alive. They're made of some living material that is almost certainly not wood. Oh, a laser sword. We are into full sci-fi now. And that laser sword thing has a real effect. Those, for example, those slug enemies that I was fighting before, I mentioned they were resistant to physical. Well, Chaz deals laser damage now, so his normal attacks could deal full damage to anything like that. It's pretty nice. And that's also very valuable. It's a revival item. Those are not easy to get. And that's the bit of castle design I was talking about. In order to get stuff, sometimes you have to go down a route that makes you leave and start over. But conversely, that means that once you go through the castle and pick that stuff up, you can go back and rest in town and come back refreshed. And in fact, I think you're kind of supposed to do that. You're supposed to learn the castle little by little as you leave and then return, healing up until you can just walk through the whole thing in, well, actually more like sprint, and get to where you're going. I think it's pretty neat. Air Slash is an attack-all skill that hits the entire enemy party. Against a row of weak enemies, it's not bad at all. It applies Chaz's normal attack damage to everyone, and it always counts as physical. In fact, that's how skills work in general. Even if it's a weapon skill, the element of that skill will override whatever weapon you're using. So that is something to keep in mind. Now these guys are weak against both Watt and Sue, so that's not bad, but as I said, Eliminate is not quite up to it yet. Also, those guys have a pretty decent amount of health. If it wasn't damaged beforehand, that Watt spell would not have killed it. Watt technique. You get the idea. I'm so used to calling them spells, even though magic is its own separate thing in this game. I also like the really kind of weird, creepy animation those things use when they open that sack on the right to breathe fire on you. That takes a bit of creativity on the animator's side of things. Also, you've noticed that Rika's double slash gains more uses very quickly as she levels up. And also, now that she's in the party, my resource dynamic has kind of stabilized. She uses skills to attack so she can use her technique points for healing freely. So I've got a nice reserve of healing right there, and I can use everyone else's technique points for attacking. So I don't have to worry in that way about whether I should use something that could be used for healing on offense instead. Pretty nice. I probably used more words there than I had to. When you get an ambush on an enemy party, suddenly the weakness of combination attacks is not there, and you can just use it to blast them all right away. You can avoid taking damage that way. So two things. Gairez, next level healing skill, and it is much more efficient than Rez, especially on Rika, because it gets a large bonus to its base healing. As for Death, well, that's one of the big reasons that I wanted to make sure Alice got lots of experience in the cave. Illusion is a debuff skill that lowers enemy agility. I don't bother with it because it's so unreliable, and she can usually just kill something instead. But this is a little different. I'm sure you can tell already what I'm working on here. Well, that was pretty good. A high chance of instant kill on the enemy party. which at first glance does not seem a whole lot different from my other combination attacks which also kill the enemy party, but the main difference is that both Rika and Alice are both fast, so it is very likely that they will act before the enemy does, which is not the case with the other combination attacks which involve Han, who is not so fast. Too bad she only has one use of that, though. And we got another laser weapon. When a character is dual-wielding weapons with different elements, the game applies the more effective one, if it makes a difference. So getting that laser claw is pretty nice, and I am getting all kinds of nice stuff. Warcry is a self-buff, and it is very strong because Grizz is very strong. That's actual game mechanics. What it does is apply Grizz's current strength to his attack power, which is to say, it doubles his effective strength for the battle. And you've seen Grizz's stats, he is all strength. The only problem is that he only has one use of it, and bosses can be kind of evasive against normal attacks. We get yet another nice thing. This shield is exactly what Han needed. It doesn't actually give laser defense, unfortunately. It'd be cool if it did, although no enemies around here use laser attacks anyway. And off-screen, I'm going back to heal up, and we're back. We've looted pretty much everything we're going to loot. So now it's just the slog towards the story stuff that we need to do here. Rimpa is a technique that removes paralysis. This can be fairly useful because while paralysis wears off fairly quickly outside of combat, it doesn't go away easily while in combat, so you can lose a lot of turns if you don't get rid of it yourself. Now this isn't really a combination attack, but occasionally we're starting to see enemy setups that work with each other a little bit. Like that. The Shadow Saber on its own is not a huge deal if it wastes a turn casting defense up on itself, because it still gets killed on that turn anyway. But if it's with a couple of enemies, it can suddenly turn things into a slog and you'd have to burn technique points. So that is a thing to be aware of. Getting levels like crazy. And now we get to ban. Hooray! We're going to need it. We're going to need it a lot throughout the entire story. And that was not the right way. That was just a dead end. This was the right way. That was a nice little scene right there. They didn't have to put that in the game, but they did. I love little touches like that. What? We got an actual boss now? I think this is the first significant boss fight in the game. That biomonster thing from the start doesn't really count in my estimation. Not much for plot, though. He doesn't have a whole lot of depth of character, is what I'm saying. Right, remember the buff this time. Being able to cast before the enemy moves is very important here. Now, if I was smart, I would have used Vision to improve Grizz's hit rate right away. But it took me a while to figure that out, I'm sad to say. Yeah, this is a boss with hit-all attacks, and we don't have any party-wide healing. Zan itself is not too bad, because we have at least one or two characters that take very little damage from it. That sort of action is what we want. We want to cast that the entire battle if we're that lucky, but we're not that lucky. Grizz's normal attack deals more damage than Vortex when he has that buff up. Also deals more damage than Chaz's Su once he runs out of crosscut. It is formidable provided we can get it to hit. And I don't know how you pronounce it. Gires? Whichever it is, it's very helpful here. And there it is. That is the reason that Juza is the nightmare of speedrunners. Because your survival is subject to the whims of how many times he uses Force Flash. If he does that 2 or 3 times in a row, that's probably, or I should say definitely, the end of the run right there. It's not terribly likely since he has 4 different actions. But if he uses too many attack alls, you can lose even if your stats are decent. Look at Grizz and Han there. In fact, the entire party is starting to fall behind. Girez is a full heal. Without that, I would not be able to complete this battle. But that's still only 2 characters. There it is. And now you've seen the general strategy that I'm going to be using on more or less every boss in the game. This is not a Romancing Saga game. The bosses do not have terribly complicated mechanics. But I think I can forgive that. I'm always up for a good stat test. Well, looks like we lucked out. Zio is not here right now. Otherwise, he probably would have greeted us at the door. Now, this is not T800 tech right here. Phantasy Star androids, they look like this. Though we do see some hints at some older models that are very unsettling. Well, looks like we couldn't avoid him entirely. This is the most anime villain music I've ever heard. With a little bit of video game mixed in, but it is just soaked in old, cheesy anime. I can't say I dislike it, though. There are a lot of evil people in the Phantasy Star series. What I like about how Grizz reacted to that is how much easier it is to understand if you know the history I talked about a couple episodes back. Even 1,000 years later, it might be tough to get over being treated like absolute bottom-feeder scavengers. Well, as Phantasy Star villains go, you usually don't get someone as self-destructive as this guy. We had a tyrant king, evil colonists, people who tried to start wars over a really old grudge, but nothing like this. In your average anime story, when the main character would say, "You're out of your mind," the bad guy would say, "Oh, am I?" and proceed to pull all sorts of shrewd, clever maneuvers. But in this case, no, he actually is out of his mind. That's because something else is in his mind. He doesn't care about the world becoming sterile or his own survival, because the monstrosity he's channeling doesn't care about either of those things. Normally I would just skip everyone's turn, but I just want to show off that magic barrier is serious stuff. Maybe I should have made a macro just for this. He sure is taking his time, though. The moment that face shows up above Zio is likely to be an "oh shit" moment for anyone who's played Phantasy Star 1 or 2. That is not a thing you fight in the early game, or the mid-game, and it's never been conjured like that even by people who are influenced by it. And now Alice is in a really bad state. I wish I had better adjectives. Yeah, if you took a look at the graphic of that attack in the battle screen, that did not come from Zio. That was well, I was about to say direct, but it's more like an indirect attack from Dark Force. That is not something that you recover from easily. You didn't notice, Chaz? I guess we've got a plan, then. We just faced something that wanted to exterminate everything on the planet, and Chaz didn't call that guy a selfish, conceited jerk. that conversation meeting room for the first time must have left a pretty heavy impression on Chaz. Yep, we got vehicles. We had vehicles in Phantasy Star 1, 2, and 3, so it's no surprise that we'd see some here. Yeah, let's go. Wait, no, Chaz, what are you doing? No! Okay. Okay. Well, now, we are missing both Alice and Han, and we have Demi in the team. Androids work differently from other party members. We'll go into a little bit more depth later on, but their skills are different and normal healing items don't work on them, but they have ways around that. And I think we're just about done. We've certainly gone through enough story stuff. But before we forget, and that's it. Thanks as always for watching. I'll hope to see you again next time.